Hello, everyone. Real quick before we dive into today's episode, I want to remind you that I'm now offering functional lab testing within my program in full function. I am so excited. This is about to completely transform so many lives, and I cannot wait. If you have been feeling off, whether that's stubborn bloating, fatigue that won't go away, difficulty losing weight, sleep issues, acid reflux, painful periods, mood swings, whatever the case might be, functional lab testing may be exactly what you need. This goes so much deeper than any traditional, conventional blood work. It helps to uncover hidden stressors like hormone imbalances, gut dysfunction, poor detox pathways, chronic stress patterns, and more. And it really allows us to better understand how is the body functioning and how is this dysfunction potentially contributing to the way I'm experiencing life, the way I'm feeling and how I'm functioning on a day-to-day basis. So, for a limited time, you can now book a free 45-minute consult to see if it's a fit. And because you are a podcast listener, I'm offering a special discount through the month of July so that you can take advantage of it at a discounted rate. All you have to do is schedule your free consult within the month of July, and you will receive $150 off my coaching package. So, super excited for this offer. Mention that you came from the podcast on our call, and you will immediately gain access to that discount. And we will talk all the details when we connect. Thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to supporting you. Welcome to Let's Eat. I'm your host, Emily, certified holistic health coach, functional nutrition expert, and self-proclaimed wellness enthusiast, here to meet you at the intersection of physical and mental health, the space within which we become well. This podcast is meant to explore all areas of mind and body wellness, designed to offer you the integrative knowledge, behavioral strategies, and mindset shifts necessary to uplevel your health and feel better today. We'll explore nutrition, sleep, movement, self-care and stress management, habits and routines, self-development, gut health, mental health, and more. I'm so happy that you're here. Welcome to the table. Let's eat. Good morning and welcome back. Good morning. It could be good afternoon. It could be good evening. Whatever. Good day. Let's start with that. Good day. Welcome back to Let's Eat. Today, we're going to be talking all about why the liver is so incredibly important and how we use functional testing to better understand what exactly is going on there. I started taking a deeper dive into understanding detox as a whole probably about 2 years ago. And since then, it's incredible how little we talk about our detox pathways, but especially the powerhouse that is our liver. And I think the liver is oftentimes kind of boxed into, well, I don't drink a lot, or I'm not a drinker, so the liver is irrelevant, or the liver's not important, or I shouldn't focus on that. But women, especially, this is an area I think needs to be addressed more. We need to be more aware of the role that it plays in our hormone health, in our gut health, which I'll get into today. And this should be something that we consider on a daily basis as far as how we're supporting our liver health. And this can be through diet, this can be through exercise, this can be through sleep supplementation, and also factoring it into the whole equation, especially for women who have painful cycles or any kind of GI issues. We have to consider the liver in this kind of trifecta that exists between our gut, our hormones, and the liver. So we're going to dive into why the liver is so important, the markers that we'll look at to better clarify what's going on in the liver, and then also share on different symptoms and presentations of having an overburdened or congested liver. I think that this is so important for us to understand as it relates to what we're experiencing in terms of how we feel, that it can be traced back to the liver, and certain things that you might be experiencing could be a direct byproduct of having an overburdened liver or a liver that's not functioning properly. I also want to talk a little bit about the liver markers that we traditionally see in conventional blood work or what your doctor will test for at your primary care or your annual, your physical, whatever type of testing that you're getting done that route. Not to say that there's not still value there, but then also comparing it to what we look at in functional health and shed light on the difference there. Ultimately, what I want you to continue to remember, especially as we move through the series, is functional labs are looking at the function of different systems. So, this is likely very different than what we're going to find with conventional healthcare. It is a it is more of a micro examination around each system, and in this case, it's either hormones, immune, digestion, detox, energy production, whatever the case is, as opposed to maybe just looking at deficiencies or in, the liver markers case, that's typically looking at any damage that might be present within the liver. So I'm going to clarify this a bit more, but I want to just be very clear on the difference as far as what we're looking at. Both can bring value to our understanding of the body, but they are going to show us something different. And so relying on maybe what we see with our healthcare provider might not be sufficient when we're really trying to look at the function as opposed to what these more traditional markers show. Now, from a personal standpoint, I had some pretty painful cystic acne in my early 20s. I was abusing antibiotics, I was drinking a whole bunch. And then when I got genetic testing done 2 years ago, I learned that I have poor detox and I need to support that a little bit more than maybe the average person. And so, with that said, looking back in retrospect, I know that my symptoms, which cystic acne was the primary concern, but I'm sure that there are other issues. I mean, I was just generally inflamed. You know, I'm sure that there were other subclinical symptoms I was experiencing. I just don't totally remember them. I just probably chalked it up to just this is how I feel. I am almost 110% positive that it was all connected to my gut and my liver. And the liver is such a player in skin health, as is the gut. I mean, there are experts that say the gut is a direct reflection, or the skin is a direct reflection of the gut. And a lot of skin issues like acne, rosacea, eczema, you name it, can be connected to a congested liver. Because you think about it, if the liver is congested, if it's overwhelmed, and the skin is another important part of the detox system, and there's malfunctioning there, then it's going to be connected, right? There's going to be a relationship there. So it's just fascinating because this is not something that's talked about. I feel very passionate about this, even to the point where I am excited. I'm very excited to work with women. I have a client in particular I'm working with right now. She's dealing with a very similar issue like I had in my early 20s, and I am so excited to support her. We already looked at a GI map with her, and we can see that there's leaky gut, very, very extreme leaky gut going on. So it's an immediate healing opportunity, an immediate place that we can start, and then we'll wait on the remaining test results. But I just feel so strongly because this is such an experience that I had in my early 20s. I have a whole episode. Actually, I have a couple different episodes on it. But that was really rough. It was really hard. And this was at the beginning of when I started my Instagram and I was getting into health and wellness. And I remember feeling so ashamed, and I had lacked so much confidence, and I was so insecure about my skin because it was so painful and I couldn't understand why. And obviously, at this point in time, I had very limited information about the body. I mean, I was just getting started. So I feel so grateful now that I still have a lot of learning left to do. There was always something to be learned, but I feel so grateful that I'm able now to take my personal experience and not only empathize with someone, and she is in her early 20s, and I just feel like it's almost like a full circle to be able to help her now and educate her. And then also with the support of her lab data, we can really tackle this most effectively. And I think it also definitely has a lot to do with the liver, the gut, and then the relationship of both of those areas with our hormones. So, like I said, I'll get into that, but definitely feel very passionate about this topic, and I look forward to being able to use functional testing as a route to uncover liver congestion and what that means and educate clients on it, especially those who are dealing with skin issues, because of my personal story and my experience and the resource that I didn't have in my early 20s. I mean, I look back and I tried to cut out a bunch of things. I thought I was doing all the right things, and my skin was not happy. And I'll look back at videos or pictures and be like, holy cow, my skin was so, it was so affected. And it was painful, and I just remember hating every second of it and feeling so sad about it. And honestly, I don't think you can really understand the experience until you've had the experience of what it feels like to have that going on. Now, not trying to be insensitive to other greater health issues, but that was my experience, and that was what I was dealing with, and it was just really challenging. And I felt like I, at the time thought that the way I was living my life was healthy. And not to say that it wasn't healthier, but there was a lot of room to grow and a lot of learning to be had to really understand the connection that was there. Okay, so let's dive into why the liver is called Grand Central Station and what exactly this means. I'm just going to rattle off all of the reasons, and I don't even go as far as to say all of the reasons, most of the reasons, because there are so many responsibilities of the liver outside of just detox. And I want to be sure that I highlight the most important ones. So, as mentioned, the liver is responsible for detoxification. So, this includes drugs, alcohol, metabolizing our steroid hormones, environmental toxins, allergens, you name it. Very important. Now, the process of detoxification within the liver consists of two different phases, phase one and phase two. And if there's dysfunction or a lack of nutrition in either one of these areas, there's going to be an issue. So, for example, we need a certain number of amino acids to facilitate phase two of detox. Now, if you know anything about amino acids come from protein. So, protein is broken down into amino acids, and amino acids are the building blocks of the body. So, they are so essential. However, if our body is not breaking down protein properly, then are we able to utilize the amino acids for phase two of detox? Probably not. And this is not just relevant here. This is relevant to a number of different areas, including our blood sugar, including our gut lining, including neurotransmitter production, which has to do with mental health. It has to do with our hormones. It has to do with muscle mass. It has to do with so much. So we won't get into protein digestion, but this is a huge, huge, huge factor that we do in fact test for. And this can speak a lot to impairment with phase two of detox, but then also impairment just in general with digestion and what in the world is going on there. But we know it's all interrelated. The liver is responsible for hormone metabolism, so especially estrogen. And this is something that I feel very strongly about, this concept of estrogen dominance and how much we're not talking about it, and how much I feel it is a driver for issues like PMS, fibroids, acne, the list goes on. Heavy periods, any kind of irregularity with our cycles. And I don't think we're talking about it enough. And I'm so grateful to now have testing. I'm so obnoxious with like, oh, testing this, testing that. But that's the point of this, right? We were in the midst of the Functional Foundation series. Of course, I'm going to be, singing the praises of functional testing, because why wouldn't I? It's incredible. But we can look at our estrogen, and we can look at if there's any presence of estrogen dominance. Now, as a caveat, the way we do this is we're looking at the progesterone to estrogen ratio. And that is another checks and balance system within the body. We want that healthy balance between progesterone and estrogen. We want a healthy balance between estrogen and testosterone. We want a healthy balance between our sympathetic and our parasympathetic nervous system. If you recall from the last week's episode, we want a healthy balance between cortisol and DHEA. So there's a lot of good and bad bacteria. The list goes on. There's so many of these checks and balance systems within the body. Histamine to DAO, which we'll get into. So all of which are super critical, and we want them in a healthy balance. And so this is no different, but we're going to look at this ratio, and this can help determine, are we in a progesterone dominant state or are we in an estrogen dominant state? Neither are preferred, right? We obviously want a healthy balance there between the two, but when it comes to estrogen dominance, this is very common, at least to my understanding from what I know. And this is where we have a problem, because what's happening is if the liver is overburdened and the liver is congested and its responsibility to break down estrogen is impaired, then that estrogen is going to recirculate within the body. And that's a problem, right? We don't want that. We want our body to be able to process and metabolize and excrete and eliminate hormones, because that's what a healthy body does. And so buildup of this estrogen within the body is going to then result in the symptoms that I just mentioned. And it can also progress into more extreme issues. I'm not going to get into that, but that is definitely something that I think will be more and more looked at over the years, where there's estrogen driven cancers and, different issues that have to do with estrogen and excess estrogen, and how much of an impact this has on our health and the potential repercussions of not addressing it. So, something that I want to really emphasize here is this concept of estrogen dominance. We will be looking at a couple different markers, including your estrogen, to determine if this is a factor, especially if you are a woman. This is not to say that men cannot also be in an estrogen dominant state. Okay, so it's definitely plausible for them as well. But I would say that more commonly it's found in women, and then we are seeing more cycle related dysfunction associated with this state. Similarly, we see that the liver plays a massive role in fat digestion and absorption of fat soluble vitamins. The liver is responsible for bile production, and then bile is stored in the gallbladder. So, to give you just a crash course on bile, bile is a fluid, like I said, that's made by the liver, and it plays a very big role in digestion, in detox, in the microbiome. So it's created using cholesterol and bile acids, along with a couple other ingredients, we'll say. And it is drained into the gallbladder, and it holds on to this bile until a fatty meal triggers the release of this bile into the small intestine. And this is where it helps to digest food and support detox. So, bile helps to emulsify fat. And from there, enzymes like lipase can digest them. So, we'll talk more about digestive enzymes in a later episode. But if we do not have sufficient bile, then clients might experience bloating, they might experience fatty stools, they might have deficiencies in fat soluble vitamins, because we need a source of fat to help the absorption of vitamins like A, D, E, and K. And bile is also a primary pathway for eliminating excess cholesterol, which I think is so misunderstood, because if we have problems with bile production or the flow is sluggish in any way, this is where we can see cholesterol buildup. Now, cholesterol is useful, it's necessary, it's needed to create bile, it's needed to create hormones. But if we're having issues in this in this department, then we might see elevated cholesterol levels. And I feel so strongly about this, because 9 out of 10 people who come to me say they have high cholesterol. And I personally believe that this is one of the most misunderstood markers. I think we're not looking at it properly. I think we're missing certain markers that are better suited to determine cardiovascular risk. I think we see immediately elevated LDL, and suddenly, we have to cut out all eggs and red meat and all the things. And I just think we're not looking at it properly. I think it's a very misunderstood marker and we're misreading it. So this is huge. We have to be considerate of the relationship between liver and cholesterol and how if there's any kind of bile issue going on, which we can test for, we can have a better picture and better clarify maybe what the imbalance or the dysfunction might actually be. Also, bile is super important for excretion of fat soluble toxins, hormones, drugs. So it plays a role in detox. And if we're not having sufficient bile flow, then these toxins can get reabsorbed into circulation and that can promote systemic inflammation. This goes back to the conversation about estrogen dominance. And then also, detox isn't complete until the waste and the byproducts of detox are excreted via bile in the stool. So, if we're having poor bile flow, things are getting backed up, that can obviously be a problem. If phase 1 and phase 2 are working perfectly, but phase 3, which I didn't mention before, phase 3 is typically just referred to as elimination. So, it's just excretion of said toxins. If there's any dysfunction there, then obviously the detox process is impaired. So, it's a pretty cumbersome concept, and there's a lot of support that's needed over the course of the process of detoxification, but then also as it relates to digestion, that any step of the way where there's any kind of dysfunction or insufficiency or imbalance or whatever the case is, this can lead to problems. This can lead to dysfunction and issues and loss of homeostasis and stress within the body. And so just drawing our attention to this more and more, and then using the markers that we have available to us to really clarify for us what exactly is going on, this can be really, really powerful. Outside of just what I've just mentioned, those are some of the more important ones that I wanted to shed light on, but it's also a player in blood sugar balance. It is responsible for immune function in some capacities. So there's a number of roles that the liver plays. Now, some signs that your liver might need support. And I think this is what's challenging because of the fact that no one is immediately going to jump to, oh, it must be my liver. Like somebody might say, if I'm dealing with acid reflux or constipation or indigestion, your brain might immediately go to, yeah, my gut needs support. Or if I'm having hormonal symptoms, then you might say, oh, I need to work on addressing my hormones. The liver is a little bit more non-obvious, we'll say, because number one, we're not thinking about the liver in this way, but a lot of these symptoms can be all interrelated. So, for example, any kind of liver burden can result in chronic fatigue. It can result in skin issues, like I said, so acne, rashes, dull complexion, things of that capacity, hormonal imbalances. So this can look like PMS. This can look like heavy periods. This can look like low sex drive or low libido. Something else that's really interesting, and this is very commonly looked at in traditional Chinese medicine, is waking between 1 and 3 a.m. in the morning, which you might be like, what? That's so specific. Like, what? This is when the liver is doing its thing. If you look at like a Chinese medicine clock, it gives you different windows of time when certain organ systems are doing their thing. Detox becomes very active over the course of sleep alongside reset and repair. And so if you're waking regularly between this window of time, that can be an indicator that there's something going on there. It's very, very fascinating. Similarly, bloating or fat intolerance, this speaks to the bile conversation. There can also be a histamine sensitivity or a chemical sensitivity, maybe intolerance to supplements. So these issues can all reflect a congested, burdened liver. Now, what's fascinating here is we can have an overburdened liver, but it's not diseased. And that's where the functional kind of gray area comes in. When we're looking at this subclinical experience of there's too much going on, or the body's overburdened, or there's dysfunction in either the bile department or in our detox pathways, or whatever the case is in our phases of detox, as I mentioned before, yet it's not going to be detectable by traditional medicine. Or rather, I guess traditional is it's hard to use the word traditional because I feel like traditional could also refer to like a more holistic approach. So I'll say conventional medicine. And this is the problem because we're only going to see in, say, ALT, AST, cellular damage reflected. We're not going to actually look at these systems more microscopically to understand if there's dysfunction in any area of any of the systems that I just outlined. And that's where this gray area comes in once again. It's the idea that we're looking kind of between the lines here. We're looking at how these processes are unfolding and how they can explain your experience and what's going on and how you're feeling and your outward presentation. And this is critical because then from here, we take this data and we're able to then utilize it to create a protocol that helps to work out the kinks and to restore that balance and that resilience that was lost so that the body can start to function better. Now, maybe over the course of years and years and years, you might then eventually see this manifest as an issue with your liver. Who knows? I think at the end of the day, it's all inflammation. So it really just depends on where your body is then going to manifest said dysfunction. But I just want to really point that out that this is looking at something that you're not going to see in traditional blood work. And we're looking at these systems and malfunctioning of these systems to cue us into where there might be imbalances taking place, how that is correlating then with the symptoms you're experiencing. And it gives us a ton of intel on how to better support the body to heal and restore balance in these specific areas. So, a few reasons why we have chronic liver stress, why the liver is overburdened is, I mean, there is a number of reasons why. The liver is working 24/7, and the modern life just places so much demand on it that the liver simply cannot take it. And it needs a lot of support in order to do what it needs to do. So it's influenced by environmental toxins. So this can look like pesticides and herbicides and plastics and things in the air. I mean, these are usually influences that are out of our control that we don't even think about. Okay. This can also be influenced, our liver can be overwhelmed by excess estrogen. So this can be as a result of birth control, poor gut function, xenoestrogens, which are essentially different chemicals and toxins within the environment that mimic estrogen within the body. The liver's also overwhelmed by medications, things like Tylenol, anything over the counter. That's overburdening for the liver, alcohol, caffeine. High stress and poor sleep result in less detox efficiency. So, that I think is a formula that exists within many people's lives: high stress plus poor sleep, and just general lack of support for the liver, right? Like we're just not supporting the liver. Something that I'm a big believer in and I'm a big proponent for is not only do we want to reduce our toxic burden, like reduce our toxic load, but we also want to bring in support and understand, okay, what do I need to be eating? How do I need to be living my life? Am I sweating frequently? Am I getting enough sleep? Am I eating lots of, certain types of nutrition in order to best support my liver? So it's about both. We're looking at how do I remove certain things to lessen the burden, and then how do I bring in more support? So the connection too between the gut and the liver, I think, is super relevant. And it's so fascinating because we don't typically think we don't think in this way, and that's the problem. We're going to a GI doctor to see a GI doctor for our GI, but we're not considerate of the relationship between the gut and the liver, and they are very closely linked. And basically, everything that's absorbed in the digestive tract is drained directly to the liver. So this can be nutrients, toxins, bacterial byproducts, hormones, metabolites that are produced by these pathogens. And what we don't realize is if we have any kind of like fungal overgrowth or a parasitic load, there is going to be byproducts produced by these pathogens that are toxic to the liver and must be detoxified. So we're just placing more and more demand on the body, not only because of what we're doing as human beings, but also what these pathogens that are living in our GI are also producing and causing and creating for the body. So similarly to that, most of us will probably reflect leaky gut. I say that just because leaky gut is a spectrum and it all just depends on the severity. And so, as a result of this, toxins and microbes will be leaked into the bloodstream. That's what happens. That's where the inflammation comes in, and the liver is responsible to process and neutralize them. So, if it's not being removed from the body as it should, the liver is now responsible for it. Another huge connection here is if somebody is constipated, that means your toxins are not being eliminated. This is so important. I have been working with a client on this and just educating her on the impact of not being regular. And that's not just about, I think it's, we like don't think enough about it in this lens. We think about constipation from a strictly GI standpoint. But if our urine and our stool are methods by which we detox, and you are not moving your bowels regularly and you are irregular, you are simply just allowing those toxins to recirculate within the body, and the liver is now responsible to reprocess them, and they are not being eliminated. And so you are becoming extremely toxic as a result of that. So this is hugely important if you are not regular, but just, you know, emphasizing that dynamic, that very complex dynamic between the gut and the liver. You have to be moving your bowels. Like you have to be going to the bathroom. There has to be movement there. So this is huge. This is very huge. I think it's a very big issue. We've kind of just brushed over it. We don't talk about it enough, but especially you ladies, this I feel like is a big issue, especially as it relates to our hormonal symptoms. And this kind of sits within that same space of the recirculation of estrogen and estrogen dominance. We want things moving and grooving. Okay. So please, we need to stop normalizing this. I really want to drive this point home. So I'm hopeful that I did a comprehensive job. I know it's kind of all over the place, but really just giving you the basics of all of the moving pieces when it comes to liver health and its role and its job and how it plays a massive role in our hormones, in detox, in digestion. And like I said, I probably only scratched the surface around its complexity and the way that it keeps the body doing what it needs to do. But the bottom line here is the more that it's overloaded by things that we can control, the less it's able to do the jobs that it needs to do. So remember that. The more that we place burden on it just by way of life, right? Just by the way that we choose to live our lives, by the products we're using and drinking alcohol and overuse of medication and all the things, the harder it has to work in order to do the bare minimum. The harder it has to work for doing all the things that it is specifically meant to do. This is a byproduct of the modern world. So obviously some things are not in our control, but the more that we can prioritize taking care of our liver, the better it will function, better it will be able to do what it needs to do. And what we're not talking about enough is the life experience that we're having, as far as symptoms go, that are likely a direct reflection of what's going on in the liver, if not still connected to the gut and hormones, which obviously we look at everything all together, but it's a massive consideration to be made in the midst of one's health journey. So, a few of the markers that we look at when it comes to understanding liver health. Now, all five foundational labs play a massive role in really showcasing what's going on with the liver, especially given the fact that, once again, our hormones and our gut are so connected to the liver. So, with all of this kept in mind, we have to look at each marker in tandem with each other. That's just the reason why using all the labs is so valuable and why we want to see the whole picture and look at it from a bird's eye view so that we can really understand what is contributing to this and what can be done about it. So to start, in the GI map, we look at something called beta glucuronidase. Anything with an ASE at the end is indicative of an enzyme. So just a fun fact. And this enzyme is produced by gut bacteria. And what happens here is this production, or the production of beta glucuronidase, undoes phase 2 detoxification. This is glucuronidation. That's what that's called. So, one of the best analogies that I was given when it comes to learning about beta glucuronidase is, imagine that the liver is walking around and tying the shoelaces of all these toxins. Okay, the toxins are being tied, the shoelaces of the toxins are being tied, say they're being tied to a binder, right? So that they can be removed from the body. And the liver's going around the circle, tying everyone's shoes. And then beta glucuronidase is coming behind the liver. And I'll say more specifically, coming behind phase 2 detoxification and unlacing all the shoes, untying all the shoes. That's essentially what beta glucuronidase does. So, elevation in this shows us that there is potential dysfunction when it comes to detox. This can speak to estrogen recirculation. This can speak to detox burden. This can speak to microbiome imbalances. So, if we see elevation in beta glucuronidase, this is via the GI map, we know that that enzyme is elevated. And so it's basically going in and undoing everything that the liver has just done via phase 2. And this can result in a burdened liver. This can result in a ton of issues as it relates to detox. This is especially relevant in estrogen dominance, like I said before. So we'd want to look at this in light of your estradiol number, which is the form of estrogen that we look at. It's also very relevant with skin issues, histamine reactivity. So there's a couple different, I want to say red flags, I guess we can say, but we want to be considerate of this marker in relation to estrogen, because if there's estrogen dominance going on, or if there's elevation in estrogen, and there's also elevation in beta glucuronidase, this can speak to a dynamic that's there where there's elevation in the beta glucuronidase. That means that estrogen is not being metabolized properly, it's being recirculated into the body, and this is an area for us to focus on. Similarly, we will also want to look at opportunistic or parasitic infections. So, any kind of pathogenic overload can increase the toxic load and inflammatory burden on the liver. So, this can look like H. pylori, candida. This can be a number of different issues. And then elevations in the opportunistic bacteria. And just the presence not only speaks to dysbiosis, likely then also contributes to leaky gut. And then we know that there's a dynamic that exists between the liver and the gut. If we're dealing with leaky gut, then toxins and all of that, all of those, you know, food particles and toxins and medications and so forth can be leached into the bloodstream and then be placed on the liver and cause lots of issues. So we want to better understand the dysbiosis, the leaky gut, and then how that's directly impacting the liver. We also, more specifically, which this is one of my favorites, look at urinary bile acids. And this essentially means that there are bile acids that are spilling over into circulation because there's a long line at the liver and the liver isn't able to keep up with its job. So if there's an elevation in UBAs, we see that as poor bile recirculation, we see that as liver congestion, we see that as sluggish detox. And it's basically, suggesting that the liver is pushing out excess waste, but it's not eliminating it. It's not eliminating it effectively. So, low levels are usually found in healthy individuals, and elevated urinary bile acids can point to lots of health problems, but more specifically, can point to lots of healing opportunities for the individual. Now, having a missing or congested gallbladder can result in lower than normal bile acids. So when we have extremely low bile acids, this would lead us to then inquire, do you have a gallbladder? That's obviously an important consideration to be made. But outside of just a missing gallbladder, this can also be a sign of poor bile flow. So that's something that I mentioned earlier, and the value and the importance of it. So looking at this marker in tandem with one's digestive experience. How are they digesting fat? Looking at the marker from the GI map called steatocrit, that's going to tell us about fat digestion. So it's going to help flesh out the picture for us. But then high values, as I mentioned, this means that there's excess bile acids that are spilling over into the bloodstream and are being excreted in urine. And this, like I said, can indicate that the liver is congested. So this is really important because symptoms of elevated urinary bile acids can look like unstable blood sugar levels, and inability to lose weight. Weight loss resistance is a real thing, and I come in contact with it every day. I feel like whether it's hormone driven, women who are perimenopausal, menopausal, that presents a little bit more challenge, but something to do with the liver. We're not talking about this enough. This can mean a sluggish metabolism. This can mean elevated LDL cholesterol. This can mean elevated triglycerides, reduced HDL. Okay, this is where that cholesterol misinterpretation, misunderstanding comes in. This can look like indigestion, an intolerance to alcohol and fats, recurrent headaches, depression, irritability, hormonal imbalances, body odor. So important for us to understand. These symptoms are rarely ever talked about in relation to the liver. And I think the problem here, for example, and I'm not trying to say that everyone who has high cholesterol, this is the issue, because I think there's lots of other factors, but we're looking at cholesterol as being the problem. But if we're looking at it through this lens, we know that this is the result of the problem. And that's the difference. That is the difference. It's a huge difference that the elevation in our triglycerides or our LDL or whatever the case may be, that is looked at as a cardiovascular risk factor, and it's looked at as let's target that specifically. But over here, we might have a congested burden liver. And if we do, that's just going to continue to drive inflammation within the body. It's going to continue to be overburdened. It's not going to improve because it's not being addressed. And then we're going to see a whole host of other issues that take place that manifest. And maybe it's not a cardiovascular, maybe it's not a cholesterol issue that persists. Maybe that remains the same. Or maybe we're put on a statin for that, but then we're going to see it manifest in other ways, other hormonal issues or GI issues, all because we haven't yet looked at the liver and we haven't yet looked at these issues that are driven by dysfunction in this arena. And we're just not talking about this enough. So this is one of the biggest takeaways that I want you to focus on throughout the entirety of this series. This goes for any kind of GI pathogen. I probably said this in the last episode, but the pathogen is not the problem. The pathogen is the result of the problem. Why is the body weak enough that a pathogen felt it could come and make a home for itself in your small intestine, right? Why is that the case? Same thing here. The symptoms are not the problem. We're not pinpointing the problem, nor are we targeting just the data. We're looking at everything as a whole, seeing the whole picture so that we can understand how it all interconnects and where the stressors exist and where these healing opportunities kind of all intersect so that we can really address it full-fledged, full force, and prevent it from persisting, prevent it from creating more dysfunction or developing into something more extreme, and really get to, I don't want to say the root, because the goal is not to get to the root, but the goal is to look at all the healing opportunities in tandem with each other, in connection with each other, so that we can have the greatest opportunity to heal and to feel better. So we're also going to look at the marker 8OH-DG, and this is going to show us oxidative damage to DNA. So this is more of a systemic marker, but what it can reinforce is that there is potential for detox overload or toxic burden or liver stress taking place because oxidative stress is taxing on the liver. So, this is more of a systemic issue. It demonstrates the wear and tear on the body. But while it's not a direct reflection of just the liver itself, it shows more of a whole body situation and is super important for healthy aging, for our DNA, for our cellular health, all sorts of things. Then we're also going to look at indican, and this is a marker of protein maldigestion. When protein is not broken down properly, this means we are not able to use the amino acids in the appropriate ways. I mentioned this earlier on. And it demonstrates the potential for dysbiosis as well as maldigestion, as I stated, and this can increase the toxic burden on our liver. So it might suggest the need for microbiome support. It might suggest the need for bile flow support. This is going to show us a bunch about the impact that not having the essential amino acids can have on lots of other systems within the body. But not only that, if the gut doesn't have the necessary bacteria to break down protein, if there's not enough digestive enzymes appropriate to break down protein, this speaks to more of an issue across the board that needs to be addressed and can then subsequently impact our liver and place more burden on it. So it's pretty interesting how all the things connect and all of these issues kind of intertwine, and how each marker, while I might be saying them more specifically as it relates to the liver, you can't not talk about it in light of digestion, in light of, what am I saying? Oh, hormones. I also said earlier, I don't know if I said this, but looking at elevated estrogen levels, that can also be helpful for us to better understand, looking at the mucosal barrier assessment and understanding how having a leaky gut, how that impacts the liver, places greater burden on the liver. So at the end of the day, all the markers can have some potential influence on interpreting what's going on in the liver. I wanted to rattle off a few that are more liver specific, but in general, there's so much information that can be gathered and so much insight that can be gained through functional testing, and then a protocol can be best created to support your specific needs. And like I said before, a lot of what we focus on when it comes to the liver is not only addressing all the other parts to the puzzle, but what I can highly suggest with or without testing is to remove the stressors that are placing burden on the liver. So remove the toxic products, remove the stressors, remove the alcohol, remove the medications if you can, limit and reduce them if possible. And then meet the liver on the other side with lots of support. And support is in a number of ways. Sweating regularly, moving your body, managing stress, eating lots of dark leafy greens and bitter vegetables and foods from the allium family. So, garlic and onion, getting enough protein. I mean, there's so many things that we can be doing to support our detox and liver health. Supplementing with supplements like glutathione and NAC and turmeric and milk thistle. Tally actually just started dandelion root. My girl is taking dandelion root for her pesticide exposure. So we're supporting our livers together. But there's a lot of different things that you can be doing that are not super expensive, but do a ton to support your body in this way. So testing is always going to be my suggestion moving forward. But if you want to take matters into your own hands, these are a few ways that you can do that. So I'm hopeful that this episode was educational and informative and really drove home the importance of liver health. Liver congestion and issues with the liver can manifest in so many ways, and we're just not talking about it enough. This can be hormonal imbalances. This can be mood swings, brain fog, weight loss resistance. This could be skin issues, rashes, acne, hives, eczema, fatigue, Liver burden can be, manifesting as fatigue, can be intolerance to alcohol, which I feel like that's like, I definitely don't, I couldn't put my, couldn't say with certainty, but I think I have certainly developed an intolerance to alcohol. I don't drink really at all anymore, but even if I drink a little, I just don't feel well. But that could just be the fact that I just don't drink. But intolerance to caffeine, right? Like there's can be a lot of things that take place that we experience that are symptoms we have, and we're not talking enough about how they could be connected to the liver. So I want you to really start to think about this. As I've been saying over the course of this series, you have access to this exclusive discount for the podcast listeners. So go ahead and look at the show notes. Details are listed there. The link to schedule your free consult within the month of July to get access to the discount is there as well. And thank you so much for joining me again at the table. It is always such a pleasure. I love talking about this. As you know, I love the podcast. It's my favorite. I love the podcast. I love talking about this. And I'm so happy that you're here. So thank you again. And until next time, be well.